ho. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Story Time by Santa. Sit back, relax, and enjoy these wonderful stories that Santa is going to read to you, your family members, and your children. I hope you have a wonderful time. And if you like, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Santa loves you. Ho, ho, ho. Enjoy.
Well, good evening, boys and girls, moms and dads. I hope you got a hot cup of cocoa ready, because here we go. Santa's surprise gift. Once upon a frosty Christmas Eve, as the snowflakes danced through the air and the northern lights twinkled overhead, Santa Claus was getting ready to embark on his most magical journey of the year. But this year, he had something very special planned, someone no one knew about. Santa was planning a surprise gift for someone very dear to him, Mrs. Claus. Santa paced around the workshop, glanced at the calendar, and hummed to himself. Every year, Mrs. Claus works tirelessly alongside the elves, baking cookies, mending suits, and preparing Santa's sleigh. She never asks for anything in return. Her joy came from spreading Christmas cheer. But Santa knew how hard she worked and wanted to show her just how much she was loved and appreciated. Ho, 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 Santa chuckled to himself. Mrs. Claus deserves something extra special this year. With his red suit ironed and his sleigh polished to a shine, Santa gathered the elves for a meeting. He had a secret mission for them before he could set off to deliver toys around the world. Now listen closely, my little friends, Santa whispered. Tonight, while I'm delivering gifts, I need your help preparing a surprise for Mrs. Claus. I want to give her something from all of us, something she'll treasure. The elves nodded eagerly. Their eyes sparkled with excitement. She will make her a gift she'll never forget, Santa, they cheered. As soon as Santa set off on his journey around the world, the elves got to work. They brainstormed ideas, each one wanting to make the surprise as special as possible. Finally, they decided to create a Christmas memory tree. It would be a magical tree that glowed with ornaments representing each act of kindness Mrs. Claus had done over the years. The elves ran to gather sparkling baubles and began inscribing each ornament with something Mrs. Claus had done to bring joy. There was an ornament for every cookie she had baked, every story she had told, and every hug she had given to comfort an elf in need. As they worked, a little elf named Benny asked, how will we fit all of Mrs. Claus's kindness onto one tree? She does so much for us every single day. The head elf, Tinsel, smiled. We may not be able to fit everything she's done, Benny, but we can fill it with her biggest moments, the ones that remind her how much she means to us. By the time the elves finished, the Christmas memory tree stood tall and shimmering with all the ornaments of all the colors and sizes. Each one sparkled like a tiny star, glowing with the magic of Mrs. Claus's love. When Santa returned from his journey, just before dawn, he helped the elves move the tree to the center of the living room, right beside the cozy fireplace. They all tiptoed back to their workshop, leaving only Santa and the magical tree to surprise Mrs. Claus. Just as the sun was beginning to rise, Mrs. Claus woke up and wandered into the living room. When she saw the glowing tree, her eyes grew wide with wonder. The ornaments twinkled, each one whispering memories of happy times and kind acts. "Oh my goodness," Mrs. Claus gasped. She leaned in to read each ornament. For every batch of cookies baked with love. One read, "For every story you've shared on a snowy night." Said another, "For the warm hugs that make our home brighter." Another glistened. Tears filled Mrs. Claus' eyes as she gazed at the beautiful tree, realizing that each ornament was a thank you from the elves and from Santa. From all the kindness she had given so selfishly. Santa appeared from behind the tree, a twinkle in his eye. "Merry Christmas, my dear," he said softly. "This tree is a little reminder of how much you mean to all of us. Christmas wouldn't be the same without you." Mrs. Claus hugged Santa tightly, her heart brimming with happiness. "This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received," she whispered. "But you know, I don't do these things expecting anything in return. I just want everybody to be happy." Santa smiled. "That's why you're so special, my dear, and that's why we wanted to show you how much we love you." And so as the sun rose over the snowy North Pole, Mrs. Claus sat by the glowing Christmas memory tree, feeling the warmth of love from all her friends and family. She had given so much joy to others without expecting anything back, and now she had received a gift that would forever remind her of the love she had shown. The elves and Santa knew that they had given her something priceless, because kindness given with an open heart always comes back in magical ways. The lesson, as Mrs. Claus looked at the shimmering ornaments on memory tree, she realized the true magic of Christmas, the joy of giving without expecting anything in return. The kindness she had shown to others had filled her heart with love, proving that the best gifts are those given selfishly. So remember, little ones, kindness is like a Christmas light that glows brighter with every good deed you do. Spread love and joy, not for a reward, but because it makes the world a little brighter. And that's a gift we can all share. Wow, wasn't that amazing, boys and girls? I hope your hot cocoa is still warm. Mrs. Claus Cookie Catastrophe. Oh no, it was just days before Christmas Eve and the North Pole was bustling with excitement. The reindeer were practicing their flying, the elves were putting the finishing touches on the toys, and Santa was reviewing his nice and naughty list. But in the cozy kitchen of their cottage, Mrs. Claus was focused on one thing, baking her famous Christmas cookies. Every year, Mrs. Claus made her special cookies for Christmas, and the elves to enjoy after a long night of delivering gifts. Her recipe was a North Pole treasure, known for its perfect mix of sweetness and a dash of holiday magic. She had just started preparing her ingredients when Santa peeked his head into the kitchen. "Ho, ho, ho! Everything going well in here, dear?" Santa asked, smiling. "Oh yes, I'm about to make the best batch yet," Mrs. Claus replied confidently. "Just wait until you taste them." With a giggle, Santa wished her luck and returned to the workshop. Mrs. Claus, with her apron tied and the ingredients neatly laid out, was ready to begin. She reached for her mixing bowl and started blending the butter and sugar, humming a Christmas tune. But just as she was about to add the flour, something unexpected happened. A little elf named Sparkle came rushing into the kitchen, carrying a stack of gifts that were far too high for her to see over. "Oops, Mrs. Claus, I can't see where I'm going," Sparkle squeaked. Before Mrs. Claus could move out of the way, Sparkle tripped, and the presents tumbled through the air, knocking over the flour, the eggs, and all of the ingredients Mrs. Claus had carefully prepared. A cloud of flour filled the kitchen, and when it settled, Mrs. Claus looked around in shock. Her kitchen was a disaster. Flour was everywhere, the eggs were broken on the floor, the butter was smeared across the counter. "Oh no," Mrs. Claus gasped. "I can't make my cookies without my ingredients, and it's too late to get more from the pantry. The elves used the last of the flour for the toy stuffing." Sparkle looked up at Mrs. Claus with a teary eye. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Claus. I didn't mean to ruin your cookie baking." Mrs. Claus knelt down and placed a gentle hand on Sparkle's shoulder. "It's all right, Sparkle," she said kindly. "Accidents happen. We just need to think of a way to fix this together." Well, Sparkle brightened up a little. "I'd love to help, but I don't know how to bake cookies." Mrs. Claus smiled, a twinkle in her eye. "Well, maybe it's time we get creative. Christmas is all about making magic from unexpected things, after all." With that, Mrs. Claus began searching through her cupboards, determined to find a way to make her cookies without the traditional ingredients. She and Sparkle found some oats, a jar of honey, a bit of peppermint, and some leftover cranberries. It wasn't her usual recipe, but Mrs. Claus was confident they could make something delicious together. As she mixed the ingredients with the help of Sparkle, Sparkle helped by stirring, sprinkling, and even taste testing. The cookies didn't look like Mrs. Claus' usual treats, but they smelled wonderful and filled the kitchen with a warm, spicy holiday scent. "Do you think Santa will like them?" Sparkle asked, a little nervous. Mrs. Claus winked. "I think he'll love them because they were made with love and teamwork." When the cookies were finally baked, Mrs. Claus and Sparkle carefully arranged them on a festive plate. They were golden, chewy, and dotted with red cranberries and bits of peppermint. The two of them stood back to admire their creation, proud of what they had accomplished together. That evening, Santa returned from the workshop, tired but eager to taste Mrs. Claus's cookies. When he took his first bite, his eyes lit up in surprise. "These are different from your usual cookies, my dear, but they're absolutely delicious," he exclaimed, munching happily. Sparkle watched Santa, her face glowing with pride. "We had a little mishap, but Mrs. Claus showed me that sometimes accidents lead to new and wonderful things." Santa chuckled, nodding in agreement. "That's right, Sparkle. Christmas isn't about everything being perfect. It's about making the best of what we have and sharing it with the ones we love." Mrs. Claus beamed as she poured everyone a glass of milk to go with the cookies. "And you know, I think this will be a new tradition for us, our Christmas surprise cookies. We might not know exactly how they turn out each year, but we'll always make them with love." From that night on, Mrs. Claus's Christmas surprise cookies became a beloved tradition at the North Pole. Each year, she and the elves would gather to bake a new recipe, making it up as they went along, and each batch turned out delicious in its own special way. They discovered that the best Christmas memories didn't come from things going perfectly, but from working together and finding joy in the unexpected. lesson. Just like Mrs. Claus and Sparkle discovered, sometimes things don't go as planned, but that doesn't mean we can't find a way to make them wonderful. The magic of Christmas and of life is about embracing the little surprises and making the most of what we have. And remember, the most important ingredient in anything we make is love. So if you ever find yourself in a sticky situation, just remember Mrs. Claus, Cookie Catastrophe, and think how you can turn it into something sweet. After all, Christmas is about finding joy in unexpected moments and sharing that joy with those around us. Isn't that awesome? Well, thank you for coming and spending some time with Santa. I hope you enjoyed those stories. And Santa will be back in a couple days to read some more. Good night.